It's time for the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. The podcast you look forward to for all of your news and reviews of the best comic books hitting stands. Whether it's DC,
Batman, Wonder Woman,
Marvel,
Spider-Man,
Image,
Spawn, Saga,
Boom,
Once and Future, Power Rangers,
or whatever book or publisher you follow.
we cover them all here.
This is the place for you.
That's right, it's for everyone.
This is the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast.
Let's get it.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. I am your host, Theo. Got another good episode this week, looking at a good bit of titles coming out that have come out this past week. We're going to look at issue number 2 of Grommets from Rick Remender, Brian Post. We're going to look at Action Comics number 1066 and Superman number 15, which represents parts 5 and 6 of the House of Brainiac event. We're going to talk about those all at one time. Then we're going to look at issue 3 of Rat City from Erica Schultz and Zay Carlos. Blood Hunt number 4 from Jed McKay and Pepe Larraz. We're going to look at Star Trek Defiant over at IDW from Christopher Cantwell and Angel Unzudo, again from IDW. We're going to look at issue number 1 of Zatanna, Bring Down the House. Mariko Tamaki has returned to DC, and I am here for it. So that's with Mariko Tamaki with art by Javier Rodriguez. Then we're going to look at the penultimate issue of You and I over at AWA from J. Michael Straczynski and Mike Choi. And then we're going to look at, I've been waiting for this, we're going to look at Gatchaman number 1 from Cullen Bunn and Chris Batista over at Mad Cave. I remember watching Battle of the Planets as a kid. Loved that show as a kid. I'm telling my age. And then we're going to go on to Marvel and look at Ultimate Black Panther from Brian Hill and Carlos Nieto. This is issue number 5 of that series. And then finally, we're going to look at my book of the week and probably the book of the year thus far based on all that it's done. And that is Void Rivals number 10 from Robert Kirkman and Lorenzo De Felici over at Skybound Image. So a lot of books to talk about, so I don't want to stay on the news too much considering that. But first up, we talked about Skybound, and over at Skybound, they recently announced that Joshua Williamson and Tom Raleigh will be teaming up again. Remember, that was the creative duo over on the Duke miniseries. They are now going to be putting together G.I. Joe. So G.I. Joe number 1 will be coming out later this year in November from Skybound Image. Again, part of the Energon universe. I am totally excited to see how all of the miniseries that have been coming together over at Skybound Image with the Energon universe gets put together. So that's going to again be released November 13th. Then they had a few mystery images that Marvel kept popping up on social media. So it was finally revealed that the image was of Mystique. She will be getting her own series in October from Declan Shelby. So Mystique number 1 is going to be a 5-parter out October 16th over at Marvel Comics. So again, didn't want to look at too much news because we have a lot of books to talk about. So with that being said, let's go and jump into our reviews. And the first thing that's up is Grommets number 2 from writer Rick Remender and Brian Post over at Image Comics. So if you remember from my review of issue 1, I expressed somewhat of a concern with trying to find and connect with the language that the writers were using from my time growing up in the 80s, and just struggled with that. And I continue to do so here with issue number 2, particularly early on when Rick meets Brian's mom, and after she leaves, there's just this relationship with his grandfather that I would not have dreamed of having with any of my grandparents growing up in the 80s. I mean, the way that they just freely speak to each other, even though Brian is a teenager, I would have never had done, in the 80s, especially late 80s, I was approaching my teenage years, and yeah, that's just, they present his grandfather as a hipster somewhat, but that whole interaction between Brian and his grandfather and his grandfather's boo is just, no, I cannot see any of that happening during those times. Now, outside of that, this was a pretty decent issue. We're introduced to the 3 gens, 2 with 1 N, 1 with 2, and we get a background story about Jen with 2 N's, who is somewhat of a troubled child, but these 3 young ladies are skateboarders as well, and the 5 of them go skating around in this garage where they're chased off by a security guard, but not before Jen with 2 N's takes out the security guard, and it's not a case of her running into him. She basically lays him out by slamming his head with her skateboard, and that was just ruthless to see. But again, the way that Remender and Posen presents her is she had a rough life, so she is a rough individual, and I guess she has an issue with authority, considering how she just took out this security guard who was basically just trying to chase them off the property. And it seemed like it wasn't the first time, at least for the gens, that they've been chased off. But this was a really quick issue. You get that interaction with Brian and Rick and Brian's grandfather after Brian's mom leave. You get the introduction to the 3 gens and that early interaction between them and Rick and Brian, and then you get them in the garage and they're skating, and the security guard attempts to chase them off before he's whopped with the skateboard. But then as we get closer to the end of the issue, we see that Brian, being the rambunctious, for lack of better words, that he is, he basically calls out these guys in his pickup truck who zooms past them and almost hits them. But as he does that, those guys stop and come back to get all 5 of them. And so, of course, they take off, and Rick finds himself back in that garage because the truck is just barreling down on him. But he finds himself back in that garage, and he finds himself on the level where they had taken out the security guard, where Jen with 2 N's hit the security guard, but he finds the security guard gone and blood just everywhere. So it's kind of how it ended. Again, my biggest concern is making a connection in some sort with the characters and the time, considering I grew up in that time period, and I'm just struggling with that right now. I do think Rick and Brian are really good as lead characters and who they are as friends so quickly. And I can't wait to see how things continue, considering the introduction of the 3 gens, especially the one with 2 ends. But I don't know where it's going next. And I am probably going to have to accept that I will never connect it to my time growing up in the 80s. But we shall see. But I think I need to get out of that to probably enjoy the story more than what I am. Now, I will tell you what I am enjoying, and that's the art. The art is really good. Marino Dionissio's art is just great. So I will definitely continue reading it for that and the art alone. And I believe not only did he do the art, but I believe Brett Parson, who did the art in issue 1, also contributed this as well. So that's why it kind of looks so good. But really like the art in it. I will continue to read it. I will probably have to look at it from a different aspect again. Just get it out of my head that it's in the 80s and just accept it as it is, as a story. And maybe I will enjoy it more from a story aspect. But again, that is Grommets number 2 from writers Rick Remender and Brian Posehn, with art by Brett Parson, with colors from Marino Dionisio over at Image Comics. So I am going to talk about these next 2 books together. First up is Action Comics number 1066, the second being Superman number 16 issue 15 from writer Joshua Williamson, with art from Rafa Sandoval over at DC Comics. And so I want to talk about them together because they're both involved in this House of Brainiac event, Action being part 5, Superman being the final part 6 of House of Brainiac. And what we find in these 2 issues is that final battle come into play. We see that last city of Cthulhu is there with Vril Dox, Brainiac's son. We also find that Brainiac's wife is there. And as the Superman family are attempting to get a grasp of what's going on, the residents of the city of Cthulhu, they make their way out as well. And the issue kind of ends with what would have just been a battle between the Superman and the family, and Brainiac and his drones have now grown because the residents of the last city of Cthulhu have made their way into the battle. And while those things are going on, Brainiac is taking Lena and connecting her to the hive brain of the ship, and to kind of help boost the power of the Queen Brainiac, who basically finds her strength from feeding off of everyone else. And Brainiac, of course, if you follow Superman history, he once held Lena Luthor, and during that time, she kind of became an intelligent, sentient being as he is. And so he, figures that connecting her to the hive brain might kill her. But he also, if you can remember from a few issues ago, that he also knows that she's the only one that could possibly contain his intelligence as well. But as things move into the final part, we see that Lex plans on going in and finding his daughter and connecting himself to the hive brain as well. And as we move into Superman we see Lex find Lena, and he reflects on everything that's happened from the point that he gave her away to Brainiac to the point he got her back. And he has, he talks about his regrets and some of the things he's happy about as well. But he also reveals his final plan to beat Brainiac. And he does that by destroying the Hive Brain. And it is his last sacrifice for his daughter, because she was intending on doing the same thing, but he again feels that she may not be capable of doing so. So he goes and he does it himself by touching the Hive Brain and connecting with it. And while this is going on, there's still this battle going on between Superman and Brainiac and the natives of Cthulhu after they've been released from the city. And we see the rest of the family join in, even though Clark has told them to go and save those other cities, because the Brainiac Hive ship is basically getting ready to implode. And there's just a lot going on. And instead, they join the fight as well. And eventually we see the Cthulhuans turn on Brainiac as well. And at this point, Lex has made himself connected to the Hive Brain. And as soon as he does that, there's a ticker that starts clocking down as Brainiac begins to lose his intelligence. And as he loses his intelligence, the ship gets more and more unstable and on the verge of imploding and exploding. So he and Clark have one final battle. Clark gets Lobo and the rest of the family to get the other cities, the other bottled cities, off of the ship. But while this all goes on, Brainiac is able to get his queen into a ship, and it's just a beautiful throwback to when Krypton is on the verge of being destroyed, and Jor-El puts baby Kal-El into the ship and sends them off to Earth. Well, we see here that Brainiac takes the Queen Brainiac, who is really like a child in her current form right now because she hasn't been feeding and she needs to feed to be at full strength. But he puts her in his ship as his home. The Hive ship is on the verge of destruction, and at his last wish and his last bit of intelligence before it is completely gone, he is able to send that ship off. And you will have to follow Absolute Power to see where that ship is going. But of course, if you've seen all the solicitations and things of that nature, you know that the Queen Brainiac is going to Earth and will be a part of the Absolute Power event as well. But that notwithstanding, what's interesting at the end of this issue, being Superman 15, is that as Superman and Lobo have their one final bromance of the event, being the last sons of their two worlds, we see Clark and Lois, hugging, but Lena shows up with Lex. And as Superman is attempting to commend Lex for making that sacrifice and doing what he did and being wrong about him in everything that we've seen since Joshua Williamson's run began with Superman #1, we see that Lex isn't who we think he is. He's basically been entered into somewhat of a second childhood. We see that the effects of connecting himself to Brainiac's hive mind has really taken effect over Lex to where he doesn't even know who he is. So, and that's kind of how it ends, with Superman. Other than them telling about, hey, it's time for absolute power. But before you close the issue, and again, I read these titles digitally as they come to me from DC with the review copies. But as you get to that last page, we see what can only be Doomsday, and he is punching his way out of his prison. And so we know what is to come in the next iteration of Superman after absolute power ends. And I am hopeful that Joshua Williamson can continue the greatness that he has brought back to the Man of Steel. I know I've told him a few times he's made me a fan of Superman again with his run on the title. And I can only expect that once we return from absolute power, that he is going to be doing some damn good things with Clark and his universe, considering he specifically said that he's leaving Batman and Robin and Green Arrow to focus more on Superman. So we shall see. The House of Brainiac as a whole was okay for what it is and what it was meant to do. It was Superman's entry into absolute power, just like the whole battle with Zor and Batman was his entryway into absolute power. And it's time to see what happens next. So again, that was Action Comics number 1066, as well as Superman number 15, both written and drawn by Joshua Williamson and Rafa Sandoval over at DC Comics. Next up, we go back to Image Comics, Rat City number 3, written by Erica Schultz with art from Zay Carlos. I want to also mention the colors from J. David Ramos, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I also was surprised to see that Erica did her own lettering for this, so kudos to her for that. But we see in issue 3 now that Peter, the Spawn ability has taken over Peter, and he's able to get himself and Owen out of danger as they are coming under attack by the security forces from PTS. So the issue is really quick. The dialogue is short and sweet. There's dialogue primarily in the interactions at PTS as Dr. Booze or Dr. Bose is attempting to learn all that he can about what has happened since the blackout. And Peter is dealing, not only with this new ability that's within him. So he's had a lot of trauma thus far, not just what has happened with his team as they came back from war, but the implantation of these prosthetics for his legs. And then now he seems to have this ability, and now one of his best friends is now dead. There's just a lot going on. But before Owen dies, he tells Peter to find Quinlan. And Quinlan is this former PTS worker who knows what they're doing. And so he is trying to single-handedly bring them down. And Owen Rice, who is now deceased, is was basically helping him. And before he dies, Owen tells Peter to find Quinlan and to help him. And so as the PTS security, comes after Peter, he is now looking for Quinlan, who is really taking the death of Owen really, really, really tough. And he finds himself at the top of a building, and you could see that he has a lot of things going on in his head. But Peter eventually finds him, and explains that everything is going to be right, and that Owen told him to help him, and he's going to do that to remember his friend. And, he said the first thing that he feel he needs to do is to find what happened and who was behind the blackout. And Quinlan, in the last panel of the issue, as he falls from the building, he reveals that he caused it. So everything that seems to have happened with the blackout and Spawn's necromancy power getting into that universe was somehow spearheaded, if you were to believe what's being said by Quinlan. And so that's how the issue ends. Again, the story is real quick. I am at a loss only because I am out of step with everything that has happened in the Spawn universe. As a standalone, Rat City pretty much holds up, and I said the same thing when I was speaking about Misery last week. While it's a decent story on its own, I find myself lost because I am unfamiliar with all that has happened in the Spawn universe, and I know that it will be tough to really catch up on the 300 plus issues that have now been published by McFarlane and the folks over at Image. So if anybody got a Cliff Note rendition of Spawn that they can lend to me, hey, send it my way. I'll be happy to take a look at it to get me caught up. But the art here is beautiful. I absolutely love what Zay Carlos is doing. He has a great handle with his pencils, as this issue really shows. But I really want to give kudos to the colors from J. David Ramos. Everything within this issue is kind of on a black background because the story is a dark one. Again, that's just kind of what the Spawn universe is. But the way the colors appear on this dark background is just so beautiful. It really highlights and gives strength to everything that appears on the page, and just a great use of the palette as we go from page to page, and things just seem to change. Of course, it's heavy on the red, it's heavy on the black, it's heavy on the green, because those are Spawn colors, so you're gonna have that. But you also get your other bits of colors, and it's just really good job. I really love what J. David Ramos did in this issue. Again, it's a good story. I'm going to continue reading it. I'm going to continue reading it despite being lost on a lot of stuff within the Spawn universe. I think because Rat City is more of its own, being in this different world, that it may be easier for me to follow than in Misery, and I'm going to keep reading that one as well. But this one might be easier for me to follow simply because it's while it's in the Spawn universe. It's not in the Spawn universe, if you get my drift. But again, that is Rat City number 3 from Erica Schultz, Z. Carlos, and J. David Ramos on colors over at Image Comics. So we move on over to Marvel Comics and Blood Hunt number 4 from Jed MacKay and Pepe Larraz. So I remember when I did the review of this first issue, and I was really disappointed with how predictable it seemed. But over the last few issues, as we now get into issue number 4, I have really been impressed with the direction it has been going. So we see now that Sam Wilson, Captain America, has basically called out Blade and the rest of the vampires, and Blade can't, control his urges, and he takes the bait, and that's how issue number 3 ended. So we now get to issue number 4, and the best way I can describe it by the time we get to the end is that we see the man behind the curtain. There's the all-seeing Oz, and we come to find out that the all-seeing Oz isn't who we think it is, and we kind of get that in this story as well, as the Temple of the First Blasphemy sits in New York City. Blade and the Blood Coven are making their way through, but we see that the heroes they've split up and going in different avenues to try to figure a way to bring back the sun, take out the vampires, do something. Each of them have their own way or their own mission to bring this thing to an end. Doctor Strange and Sailor, they go to Latveria, and they seek the help of Doctor Doom. And if you remember from issue number 1, Doctor Doom had some type of perimeter set up around Latveria that basically prohibited any vampires from getting in. And so they're going to him for help because they know that this is the case. And back at this temple in New York, Blade and his crew, the Blood Coven and T'Challa, are walking through, and T'Challa is questioning Blade because something doesn't seem right. And he is constantly asking, "You're not Blade, are you?" And so Blade finally admits that he is not. He is something greater. And he reveals that he is Varney. And so at the same time, Doom and Strange and Cecilia, they're all talking about what they could do. And Doom reveals that he knows that Blade is Varney, and it basically connects the dots going back to Blade the Vampire Hunter from a while back, from issue number 5, where Varney tried to encompass the body of Blade and failed. Well, Doom basically theorized that it was tried the second time and he succeeded. So Doom is basically, he has all of these things together, and he has this plan to basically win the day. But he needs the Dark Force, and he has that. And he reveals he also has the students of Strange Academy. But the last piece he needs to win the day for the world and be the hero of sorts is he has to be the Sorcerer Supreme. And that just astonished Stephen, of course, you can imagine. But all of these things that are going on, the Hunter's Moon, they're at Asgard, they're looking for help, and they come to find that Asgard has trapped Khonshu, and they are able to release him and break him out of the prison. So all of these things are going on, and we also come to realize that T'Challa really isn't as possessed as, or at least possessed with the vampire demon within him as one would think. And that is because of the purple plants from Wakanda. They were able to basically heal him of the infection, and while it's still somewhat within him, it's also taken him out. And at the same time, we come to another realization as the Hunter's Moon and Tigra and not Breakout, what's the guy's name? They break Khonshu out of the Asgardian prison. He reveals, he being Khonshu, he reveals that Mark Spector is back, Moon Knight is back, and so he has sent his fist to help save the world. So we now have Moon Knight and his forces, they're all in this battle now. And Varney/Blade realizes this. He knows something's going on. He has Blade trapped, but again, he has Blade trapped, he has T'Challa trapped, and he's wondering what all could stop him, and that's when it reveals that Thor, who was also there, who he had drank the blood of Thor to kind of give him this godlike strength. Well, it was all a ploy to allow Thor to recuperate, and the rest of the Avengers arrive. And so the story ends where it's time to come and, do that final battle. So we will see how that all plays out. I am happy to see Mark Spector back. Not long after that, after the issue dropped, Marvel put out that they were doing a prelude issue to the new Moon Knight series that Jed McKay is going to be doing, and it's going to be an issue 0. So I'm assuming that issue 0 is going to play a lot into connect the dots between Mark Spector's return and the new series that is going to be coming out. But again, I am thoroughly impressed with how this has turned around. Again, I was really not pleased with the first issue, but I kept up with it. I've been reading a few of the tie-ins, particularly Strange Academy and Doctor Strange, and Amazing Spider-Man. Read that one also, but I am thoroughly pleased with how Jed McKay has turned this miniseries around. And so now we have one more issue to go before we get to the end. But again, that is Blood Hunt number 4 from Jed McKay, Pepe Larraz, over at Marvel Comics. We now gone over to IDW's Star Trek Defiant number 16, written by Christopher Cantwell, with art by Angel Unzuete. I've been saying from day one that Defiant has been the best Star Trek book on shelf as of now, and that continues to be the case. We've seen this last arc, and this last arc stems from one of the episodes of The Next Generation where these parasites are able to take over someone's body, and these parasites have basically taken over the outpost Starbase 99 and has basically been spreading. And so it's now up to the Defiant crew to basically save this starbase. And it's not looking good for the home team. You know, a few issues prior, B'Elanna, she was infected by one of the parasites. Then Hugh assimilated her, so she basically has two beings inside of her at the same time. You know, Ro has now been injected with the Klingon adrenaline, and she is raging. Sela is there. If you remember Sela from The Next Generation, she is the daughter of Tasha Yar, and a Romulan soldier or Romulan starship member. That, you know, and that was crazy in itself, and how Tasha went back in the past because she wasn't supposed to be there, blah, blah, blah. But Sela's there. Spock is kind of incapacitated, you know, because he went into this mind meld to try to see what these parasites want as they are coming through this rift this rift in time and space, and this opening is, you know, right basically in the middle of the starbase, and this is where they are coming in and taking over. And again, they've taken over pretty much all of the members of the starbase already. So the key for the Defiant crew to win is to somehow get that rip in time and space, to get that portal closed. And right now it's just nothing they've tried has worked. They tried shutting down the reactor, which seems to have been feeding this rip, and that doesn't work. They shut down the reactor, but they find that this rip is now self-sustaining, and the parasites are continuing to come through. So Worf and Ro are able to kill one of the I'll call them queens, one of those huge parasites, and they're able to kill that. But again, this portal is open, so they're still coming in, and Spock is finally able to recollect himself thanks to Sela, who basically insults the hell out of him until he's able to bring himself out. But he still is connected mentally and psychically to the parasites, including the parasites that are inside of the Starfleet members who are trying to make their way across the starbase. And he is able to get the members, the affected members, to resist the parasites and somehow destroy the parasites from within. That probably was the craziest part of the story, considering in the TV series, the only way that they weren't able to save anyone. You know, everyone that was there had to be killed, you know, to get those parasites out of them. But in the end, this portal is still open. They don't know how to close it. Parasites are coming through. And the next thing you know, they're teleported and they find themselves back on the Defiant. And what happens is Namira, who is the Orion medic that they they took aboard with them a few arcs ago. She teleports herself with a bomb to where this opening is, and she basically sacrifices herself to save everyone else. And she sets the bomb off. It blows up everything, and the day is saved. After this is all over, now she leaves an open message to the ship's crew, basically telling them how she is thankful for knowing them. And the funniest part, as this letter, this open communication is read, is that she beats Spock at chess, but she's not going to tell anyone. But she does, because this is the open communication to everyone. But that's not how the story ends. The story ends with a Romulan warbird decloaking, and Sela's father is there, and he basically commands her to take over the Defiant, which she does, and that's how it ends. So that will lead us into I'm assuming this is going to be a new arc now that the parasites have been destroyed and dispatched of, and this new arc will focus on Sela and her father and his attempt to take the Defiant through her. But we shall see how it goes. I'm not happy to see that Namira is no longer going to be traveling with the crew. You know, she's been around since Day of Blood and all of the after effect of that. She is responsible for saving Worf's life, you know, when he had got basically fatally wounded during Day of Blood, and, you know, using the Klingon adrenaline was able to keep him alive until he was able to get true medical attention. So I had kind of endeared myself to her being a regular member of the crew. So her being dead, but again, it's comics, so who knows? But her being dead as of now kind of saddened me. I was, again, hoping to see that somehow by the end of the story she would have survived anyway, but that is not the case. So we will see how things will go when Sela has to get face to face with her dad as we go into the next issue, which is issue 17. But again, that is Star Trek Defiant number 16. It is still to me, the best Star Trek book that is out there. Staying close to as much of Star Trek continuity as I know and feel. It's just a better story. And maybe, again, it's some of my bias against Benjamin Sisko. I don't know why. I've always had it, and you know, but and it's probably because I was not a follower of Deep Space Nine, and I know my fellow Trekkies will want to at me for saying that, and I just never did. But again, that is Star Trek Defiant, issue number 16, from Christopher Cantwell and Angel Unzueta over at IDW. So we make our way back to DC Comics and Zatanna, Bring the House Down, written by Mariko Tamaki with art by Javier Rodriguez. It's the first issue in this new Black Label series. I'm just happy that Mariko Tamaki is back at DC. You know, for those of you who follow me on the Batman universe, you know that I reviewed her entire run of Detective Comics. During that period, I know that was JT's period on Batman and kind of running the Batroom with the rest of the titles that were out there with Ben Abernathy. I don't care. Mariko Tamaki's run on Detective was the best book on shelves during that time of all of the Batman titles. I will die on that hill. I will argue that and have argued that with anyone. If you all follow the comic podcast, you know that Ian and I have had several conversations about, which title was the best during that period. He was leaning, he still is leaning that JT's run on Batman was slightly better. I am in total disagreement with that. Mariko Tamaki's run on Detective was just so much better in my opinion. But again, she is back. She has this Dark Label series, and this allows us to take a different look at Zatanna that we've seen in the past. Even with what JT did during his run on Justice League Dark, it's not an origin story. Although there are blips to the past to where we see Zatanna growing up and attempting to learn magic and not getting help from Dad. Giovanni Zatanna is, he is as different a character in this story as Zatanna is. And it's not necessarily, I don't want to call it a coming of age story as well, because Z is grown in this series. So, she's been around, but she doesn't consider herself a magician. And there was a panel within the story where a fan asks, hey, why don't you call yourself a magician? She doesn't answer that question, by the way. But Z is living with some trauma. And part of it includes events that happened during her childhood. But we see as the story comes to the end that she's accused of killing Giovanni as well. So there's a lot that's going on here, and I am absolutely loving it after this first issue. The art from Javier Rodriguez is really good. I'm assuming he's doing his own colors as well, because I didn't see any listed in the credit page. And let me just zoom real quick just to be sure. Yeah, he's doing his own colors. That's right. So he does a really good job of distinguishing the periods with how the colors are being laid. It is more muted when we get to those backstories in the past, and it's really dark as we see Z in the present. And there are a lot of questions left open after the end of issue 1, where you wonder where things are going next. We don't know whether or not this woman who has basically been coming to all of these shows in Vegas, we don't know if she is friend or foe. We don't know who this or what this monster is that has kind of made this appearance, and if this monster is the same as the shadow that has been following Z as well. So there are a lot of questions that have to be answered by the time Bring Down the House comes to an end. But again, Mariko Tamaki, she just seems to have a good handle of voices with the characters that she write. I remember when she was on Detective, and the voice she gave Huntress during her time there was just chef's kiss. Was perfect. I wish we could have gotten a Huntress story from her while she was there the first time around, and maybe we'll get another one again. I need to see Huntress back, because she is a solid member of the Bat family. But until that happens, I will take her on Zatanna. Again, the first issue was really good. I'm waiting to see what happens in issue 2 as we start to hopefully get some of these answers to the questions that were laid out in this story. Not only why she is being accused and feels she's killed her dad, but also what happened to the bully as she was a little girl. We see during that period is when she really started to grasp the power of magic that her father would eventually teach her. But we will see. I am excited about this one. Again, that is Zatanna, Bring Down the House #1 from Mariko Tamaki and Javier Rodriguez over at DC Comics.
Hey, you got a second? The Comic Book Spot is looking for comic book fans with something to say. If you're interested in writing reviews of your favorite comic books, or you want to contribute original content with articles like The Top 10 Forgotten Spider-Man Villains, or Why One More Day was the worst thing to ever happen in comics, or maybe Why Indie Comics saved the comic book industry, then we want to invite you to join our family as a writer. Just reach out and email us at writers@thecomicbookspot.com and let us know that you want to become one of our writers. It's that easy, and honestly, there's no reason not to. You get exclusive access to our staff Discord server, you get early access to comics, and you meet a lot of cool people. What are you waiting for? Just email us at writers@thecomicbookspot.com and let us know that you want to become one of our writers.
All right, we are now going to swing back over to Marvel Comics with Ultimate Black Panther #5, written by Brian Edward Hill, with art by Carlos Nieto. So, by the time we get to the end of issue 4, we now have this core team of protectors, investigators, vigilantes, however, that's looking over Wakanda as Ra and Khonshu continue their efforts to basically make their way into the nation. And so this core group consists of Okoye, T'Challa, Killmonger, Storm, and Shuri. And so T'Challa has basically sworn them to secrecy, not to tell anyone, simply because they don't know exactly who they could trust. And they have since come upon this huge green orb that they have no clue of what it is capable of. They have made the conclusion that it's not vibranium, so it's not the same substance that's in Wakanda. But Shuri and T'Challa is able to determine that it has some really powerful, life-giving abilities. Again, T'Challa is telling everyone to not reveal anything about this. So he charges them to try to find Ra and Khonshu before things get worse, while he goes and seeks counsel of the Voodoo Khan, and in particular, his main advisor over there is Imala. But Imala and the Voodoo Khan, of course, you would think, just with how they react, they're very secretive in their visions and what they relay and don't relay to T'Challa. But she basically reveals that this orb arrived at the same time vibranium arrived at Wakanda, and it is as powerful, but it is the opposite of vibranium. The yang to the is yin, more or less. And while all this is going on, Ra and Khonshu are still going and putting their plan into place. And Khonshu finds this Wakandan farmer and uses his power to turn him into this warrior. And he attacks Suri. And not in the sense of killing her, but he attacks in order to get this orb. And he does. And he's rewarded by Khonshu with his death for bringing that orb to him. But it seems that if anything, this orb has the ability to do the exact same thing that vibranium does, just from an opposite aspect. And it's quite possible that Khonshu and Ra wants to use this orb to create their own Wakanda. An opposite Wakanda, if you want to call it that. But that is how the story is going to end, with Khonshu finally having possession of this orb. I am not certain where this story goes. It has been good. I have had some issues with the pacing of it. This was a really quick read, and it was probably the best of the issues thus far, just from an action standpoint, a storytelling standpoint, and getting an idea of what might be going on. So it is still one of my favorite books in the Ultimate Universe, but we shall see what happens next. I am not sure how things will play out as Ra and Khonshu build this new kingdom that is supposed to be the opposite of Wakanda, or the equal of Wakanda, but it's opposite. And I guess we'll see. Now, the art has been really good. It's always been the case, even though we've had different artists on the issues. But you can't always tell the difference. They're very similar. This issue had Carlos Nieto on the art duties, whereas last issue, in issue 4, we had Stefano Caselli, who was on art. But you really couldn't tell that much difference. So, again, art is really good. I really like it. I wish the story picks up a little bit more, and maybe with the quick pace that it had here in issue number 5, we might finally be getting that to move the story along. But again, I'm going to continue reading it. I'm reading all of the stories in the Ultimate Universe, with the exception of Ultimate X-Men, although I do plan on catching up and reading it at some point. I'm just not there yet with everything else that I'm reading. But again, that is Ultimate Black Panther number 5, written by Brian Edward Hill, with art from Carlos Nieto over at Marvel Comics. And now we get on over to my favorite new comic publisher over at AWA, and we look at UNI number 5. This is the penultimate issue of this series, written by J. Michael Straczynski with art by Mike Choi. Again, this exists within the Resistance universe, created by J. Michael Straczynski. And what we see is that Bishop is really planning the next phase of his trap. We know that he sent his friend out to try to take out you. that didn't happen. In fact, he paid his life, in that fight against you. But what we also see in this issue is we are now seeing you is starting to remember more. And he's remembering more about who he is. And we see in one of the backstory pages that he's referred to as Umberto. So we now know where the U comes from. But while Isabel thinks that this is a good thing, U does not. He doesn't want to remember who he is. And you might think that it's a weird idea to not remember who you are, but he wants to live the life that he has now, and he doesn't want to remember. He doesn't care who he was. It's because it's not who he is now, and that's really interesting that he feels that way. And I like that Straczynski is presenting him as someone who's always looking forward and who sees the world differently. And it's a beautiful conversation between he and Isabel as they are sitting on the rooftop. And he's explaining how differently he sees the world and how he wishes that she could see the world the way he does. And you could see she really wants to see the world as he does. And you kind of get that at the end, where she's sitting alone at the on the roof, and she prays to see the world as you does. But in the meantime, Bishop is again springing this trap, and now Isabel's uncle is coming into play. Sergei, who he owes all of this money to, has basically brought Bishop in, and he tells Bishop the story of Isabel and how he can get her out into the open and possibly get you out to the open as well. Bishop pretty much figures that, wherever Isabel goes, you will follow, and that plan works. Now, of course, Isabel's uncle, he's only thing he wants is money, and he wants his debts paid off. He's just looking for a quick buck so he can continue living his lavish lifestyle. So if you can remember from last issue, in issue 4, he can no longer get his hands on Isabel's money until, because he's at this age, and the bank basically says, hey, unless she signs over the trust fund to you, or sign over, give permission to disperse these funds, you can't have it. So he is now cash strapped, and again with these debts, and so he's looking for a way to get some quick cash, and he feels turning in his niece is the way to do it, or at least helping Bishop find you by turning in or handing him his niece is the way to make that happen. But as all good things go with the mob and crime syndicates, he doesn't make it. He loses his life as well. After he gets Isabel on the phone, and he, basically gets her to agree to meet him. They take him out, another loose end tied up. And so that now leads us to where it's going to be on and popping in the final issue. So we don't see the trap being laid. We see Bishop speak of it. We know what he wants to do. He's going to have, gunmen just waiting. And he is going to use something that he remembers being told when you was last attacked. And that he has this ability to regenerate, but what the hand told Bishop was that he can't regenerate if he doesn't have a head. So Bishop's plan is to have marksmen, some of the best, waiting and basically continuously shooting rounds at Yu's head to prevent his regeneration and killing him that way. So we get an idea of what the plan is. We don't see the plan trapped. We don't see the plan laid out. But we know what's going to happen. And the last page is of Isabel, who is sitting on the roof praying for the ability to see the world as Yu sees it. She didn't want to go see her uncle, but you kind of talked her into it, mainly to get some closure. And he had well-meaning in making that happen. So we will see how things play out now that we know the last issue is going to be this final battle between Yu and Bishop as they attempt to take out the menace that has been giving this crime syndicate so much trouble. But again, I have been loving You and I from the start. I have really enjoyed everything within the Resistance universe, from Straczynski in particular, but also the other writers that have wrote series or miniseries within the Resistance universe. So we'll see how that last and final chapter, issue number 6, plays out when it comes out next month. But once again, that is You and I, number 5, written by J. Michael Straczynski with art by Mike Choi. I'm excited to see. It was just announced Straczynski's going to be at San Diego Comic-Con this year, so hopefully I get a chance to at least shake his hand, if not interview and speak with him while I'm there covering the event. But we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it'll happen. But again, You and I, number 5 from J. Michael Straczynski and Mike Choi over at AWA. So I'm going to kind of tell my age here, and it's really not a secret. Late 40s. I've been collecting comics since I was 9, and I've been I'm a child of the 80s, watching late 70s, early 80s cartoons on TV on Saturday mornings and after school. And one of the cartoons that I enjoyed watching every day, as a matter of fact, I would pretend to be the lead character of this series, was Battle of the Planets, and the main character being Gatchaman. And absolutely loved it. Like I said, I used to make believe that I was Gatchaman, used to try to draw pictures, although I have zero artistic ability. I can't draw to save my life, but at least I tried. But we now have a series over at Mad Cave Studios based on the popular early anime series from Japan. And this is Gatchaman number 1, written by Cullen Bunn with art from Chris Batista. First and foremost, this cover for issue number 1 is downright beautiful. It has all of the members of the Science Ninja team, Gatchaman smack in the middle. I mean, it's just loved it, and the cover was done by Inaki Miranda, and I love it. I can't wait to get the actual issue in. But all of the covers in the series look great. You really couldn't go wrong with either one picking it up. So what did I enjoy about... Well, let me say what I didn't enjoy. And there wasn't much that I didn't enjoy. If the one thing I didn't enjoy was basically that it ended too soon. It was really a good issue. But what I enjoyed, I don't want to call it corny, what it really was, in a way that it took a lot of how they did these cartoons that came out of Japan, whether it was Speed Racer, whether it was Voltron, whoever. And then they add these subtitles or they do these voiceovers. And for the US version of Battle of the Planets, of the Science Ninja team, they added characters, so the way they made it corny. And what Cullen Bunn does with this story, and it's really modernized, it's made for today's times, and there's some cussing going on, but the corniness that you saw on TV with how these stories were being told, you kind of get it here as well. Most of the characters from the early series are there. They have their names that have typically always been with them. Again, depending upon which version of the Gatchaman universe that you watch, some of the characters had different names. But Cullen Bunn really stuck to the original story, at least how it appeared here on US TV. And I really appreciated that. And I found myself laughing at the corniness of it, because again, it felt like this could have been a TV episode with how it all played out. Now, again, the Science Ninja team, their greatest enemy is the group Galactor. They're there, of course, and we don't get too much of Galactor in this first issue. If you want to see more, and the way they're doing it, they have the main series, they have the Gatchaman series, but they also have in this checklist of what's coming within this particular universe, there are several one-shots or other miniseries that are coming out. So at the same time Gatchaman #1 was released, they also released a miniseries focusing strictly on Gatchaman himself, and that's Ken. And we see more of Galactor in that series than we do in the first issue of Gatchaman itself. So again, if you can really kind of follow it along, there's not as much difference. You at this point you don't need to read it to know what's going on. Is what I guess I'm trying to say. But that's out there as well, and I did read it. But my suggestion, if you want to pick this up, and I do suggest that you pick it up, is to read the Free Comic Book a Day edition that came out in May. That's kind of considered zero of this. And so that more than anything will lead into the Gatchaman series. But you don't need to read Ken to follow along with this, at least not yet. Maybe at some point you will see what's going on in Ken and it makes its way into the main series. But I don't know that yet, so don't take my word for it. But I'm going to continue to read this, particularly for the nostalgic aspect of it, but also because issue 1 was just really good. I really enjoyed it. The art was beautiful. Chris Batista did a hell of a job. The colors from Carlos Lopez, those two just fit like a T. Everything is just bright and vivid, and for what they're trying to do in reliving this classic anime series, it fits. It really good. Again, it's a modern take on the old Battle of the Planet series, but I am definitely in for it. The whole team just have all of those mannerisms that you remember from back in the day, if you were watching back in the day like I was. But again, that is Gatchaman #1, written by Cullen Bunn, art by Chris Batista, over at Mad Cave Studios. And finally, we get to our last book of the episode, my book of the week, probably my book of the year, unless something comes out. So first of all, this series as a whole is my favorite series right now, but Void Rivals number 10. Let's get all this out the way. Void Rivals number 10, written by Robert Kirkman, art by Lorenzo De Felici, over at Skybound Image. Okay, out of the way. But, wow. Everything about this issue was perfect. Absolutely, positively perfect. I have a review up on the site. Take a look at it. I explain it in more detail as to why I feel this was just the perfect issue of everything that is Energen universe right now. This here just takes the cake with how good this was put together. So there is this huge reveal, and it really, more than anything else that you may have read, whether it's in Void Rivals, whether it's in Transformers, whether it's in any of the G.I. Joe miniseries, Duke, Cobra Commander, what's going on with Destro and Scarlet. None of it matters compared to what's revealed in issue number 10. So, up until this point, the Transformers were kind of the linchpin to everything in the Energen universe. But they were the linchpin simply by their presence. Jetfire's reveal in issue 1 of Void Rivals, the Transformers being on Earth and interacting with Duke and G.I. Joe and Cobra. So they were kind of the linchpin. But what we get in this story is how they are the linchpin with Void Rivals. Because if anything, Void Rivals were kind of the outlier. We were told they were a part of this universe, but we really didn't know how, outside of the fact that Jetfire made his reveal there. We saw Springer make his reveal, and we saw all of the other minor characters that exist within the Transformers universe. But what they do here, what Robert Kirkman does here in putting this issue together, was just absolutely perfect. I cannot express how perfect it was. And that reveal was that the Zertonians and the Agorians, that more than anything, at the cellular level, are Cybertronian. So the question now becomes, are they evolved ascendants of the Transformers or what? And there is a point in the story where Celia is unconscious. Remember, she was injured badly a few issues ago when Proximus gets her with one of his bows. Oh, no, not with the bow. He basically throws her staff back at her. And so she's been badly injured. And we now see, while she is unconscious, she is speaking to Zerta. And Zerta is this god. It's the god of the planet, more or less. It's who the Zertonians more or less worship. And once she is revived, tying things up, what they call the mind eye, the stone that's in their forehead, Springer identifies as an energy port. The sacred ring that surrounds the planet, he says, is an energy engine. It basically creates energy. So again, we see all of this stuff tying together. And then he tells the story of legend of early Cybertron and one of the oldest Cybertronians who break free from the rest of the planet and leaves after they gain their freedom. And her name was Zerda, which is the god that the Zertonians have been worshiping all of this time. So in this one issue, Robert Kirkman has just laid bare everything that makes the Energy universe what it is. And the Transformers no longer have to serve as the linchpin with all of this, because they're now ingrained in this world of the Zertonians and the Agorians. And just the way this all lays out is just downright perfect. And I absolutely loved this issue. There were many of times where I just let out cuss words at the shock of whatever happened on that particular page, whether it was the reveal of the energy ports, whether it was the way in which Springer just laid out Proximus with his sword, whether it was the conversation between Zaliek and Derek's father, where this secret that the Zertonians and the Agorians are really one, the secret is so sacred, it's so precious that he's willing to let his son die. And that says a lot. Just everything in this issue was perfect. That includes the art. And the colors from Patricio Delpich, chef's kiss. Kind of like what I spoke about Rat City, with everything being set on a dark background. You kind of get it here as well, because again, they're outside. The only thing that's behind them is space and the stars, so it's really dark. And the way those bright, vivid colors, the way you see Celia as she's glowing with this energy that's flowing throughout her once Springer is able to save her, it's so beautiful. And this issue was perfect. I gave it a 10 out of 10 in my review on the website. Take a look at it. Again, this is my favorite book on the shelf right now. And that says a lot as someone who grew up with the big two, grew up with Marvel and DC. This story is just so good. And what happens next in issue 11? Well, it looks like we're going to be going to war, because we see that Zaliek has basically ordered a squadron of troops to the wasteland to find Derek and Celia, because they can no longer find where Proximus is. So again, no one liked going to the wasteland. It was wasteland for a reason. No one was going there. And the fact that he was willing to send his troops there to find Derek and Celia, to make sure that they did not escape and get away, so that they could dig deeper into this secret of their people goes to show just how important they feel this secret is. But it looks like we're going to at some point get that secret to come out. We already know now what it is. But, we got some fighting that's going to happen in issue 11. And we know that for certain because Skybound sent out some preview images for issue 11. If you want to see that, I have it up on the site as well. If you get to go ahead and take a look there. But just everything about this was just perfect. And you always find moments of laughter in this as well, simply because of who Derek is. Celia is this warrior, but Derek has no problem saying, "Hey, I'm just a pilot." But his little glimpses here and there of comic relief is just enough to make the story just enough of a break so that it's not consistently just dark, danger, dark, danger. And I love everything about this book is great, but everything about this issue was marvelous. I can't believe it took me this long to give Void Rivals a 10 out of 10 on any of the issues. I'm happy I'm finally able to do so. This issue absolutely deserved it. It was absolutely perfect in everything that I look for in a comic book. But again, that is Void Rivals number 10, written by Robert Kirkman, art by Lorenzo De Felici, over at Skybound Image. So that is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Bin Comic Book Podcast. Just another great episode of a lot of good stuff on shelves that this past weekend, and some so-so stuff as well. But hey, we read it all here. Next time, we got another decent slate of titles that are out next week that I'll be picking up and reading. I will probably read Doctor Strange number 17 from Jed McKay and Pascal Ferry. That is another Blood Hunt tie-in. If you're following that along, or if you're not following that along, Stephen's brother Victor has possessed Stephen Strange's body while he is in his astral form as a part of the Blood Hunt event. And so he and Wong have been going back and forth, and so I might cover that and see how that all ends up. It's been okay as a part of the tie-in. Not sure if I'm gonna cover it next week or not. But also, Radiant Black returns. Radiant Black number 29 and number 29 and a half from writers Kyle Higgins, Joe Clark, and artist Eduardo Ferrigato. This is again the Catalyst War continuing that event as you see it from both aspects of Radiant Black, with Nathan and Marshall each having their own story with themselves as the hero. So we'll get both parts of that, 29 and 29.5. Then there is Scarlet number 2 from Kelly Thompson and Marco Ferrari. Public Domain is back. Public Domain, the series from writer-artist Chip Zdarsky. He's going to also have Rachel Stott teaming up with him. It's going to be interesting to see how that comes back. When that series ended, or the first volume of that series ended, the Dallas family had regained control of the Domain line and were in the process of beginning new stories with Domain. And we're going to see how that plays out as we also get that new Domain series that is supposed to be coming out over the next month or so as well. I think it's coming out in July. But those two titles, Domain and Public Domain, are going to basically tie in with one another. But next week is going to be Public Domain number 6. So that will probably lead into Domain itself, and I'm ready for both. But I'll be taking a look at that. Then over at DC Comics, The Boy Wonder #3 from writer-artist Juni Ba. I've been really high on this thus far. You know, that last issue that focused on Damian and Jason was just really deep, seeing how hard of a life Jason had been living in that universe that Juni Ba has created. So that'll be out. X-Men Blood Hunt Cyclops #1 from Stephen Fox with art from Lin Yoshi will be out. I don't know if I will read it or not. However, if I do, I will bring it up and cover it on next week's podcast as well. Then we get issue #3 of Space Ghost from writer David Pepose with art from Jonathan Lau over at Dynamite. Also at Dynamite, we get a spin-off series for those who are reading the Thundercats. We get a spin-off with Thundercats Chitara #1 from writer Sue Lee with art from Domenico Carbone. Again, that's over at Dynamite. It's a good bit of books coming out next week. I'm excited to see what's going on and how things play out, particularly with Domain and Radiant Black. I kind of like the idea of what Kyle Higgins and those guys are doing with Radiant Black, and, you know, presenting the story of the Catalyst War from both Nathan's and from Marshall's viewpoint as the lead character. So we'll see how that plays out. By the end of it all, we're going to settle on one of the two being Radiant Black permanently, based on that poll that they've been running. So we'll see how all of that ends. Again, this is going to be issue number 29, so I don't think that is the last issue of the Catalyst War. But by the time the Catalyst War is over, they will settle on one of the two, maintaining the Radiant and being Radiant Black moving forward. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that, and I'm also looking forward to the return of Public Domain. I really enjoyed that series, and I am very excited to see how all of that plays out with the new series Domain that'll be coming out as well. And then, of course, The Boy Wonder, again, I've been enjoying that series. I've already read it, so I already have my remarks and thoughts already written down. But we'll talk a little bit more about that on next week as well. But again, a lot of great books coming out next week. Looking forward to it. It's going to be a good time. That is going to do it for this episode of the Comic Ben Comic Book Podcast. I'd like to thank you all for your continued support of the program. The Comic Ben Podcast, as well as the Comic Book Spot, are a part of the Comic Book Source family of sites and media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter X at comic_Ben, or my personal account at BatmanFan_4Life. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. We're all over social media. You can also follow our sister site over at thebatmanuniverse.net for all of your news and reviews in the world of Batman. Tune in next time as we give you more in the world of comic books. Again, we truly appreciate your support. But until we meet again next time, keep reading those comics.